Hey everybody, welcome to session 63 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I can't wait to share this fun conversation I had with you with Dr. Chuck Merbitz. We'll get to more on that in a second. It's a really good one. But first, I want to give a shout out to Anthony Santagati. Anthony is a behavior analysis student who happens to have a background in audio engineering, and he reached out to me and said, hey, I think you need some help in this area. And I think many audience members would probably be nodding their head in agreement with this. So he's been helping me here and there, and this is the first interview that I'm publishing that he's worked on, so hopefully it sounds very, very nice. And again, big thanks to Anthony for the much-needed assistance. Second thing I want to mention is I will be at the Hoosier Aba Conference coming up on the, I think it's the 17th, 18th, and 19th of October. It's HoosierAba.com if you want more information. I think there's tickets still available too. So I think I've interviewed almost everyone on the speakers roster as well. So it should be kind of like a reunion of sorts, or at least as it relates to this podcast. I'm really looking forward to that. It's always fun also to meet some folks that I've interviewed that I've never met in person, which will be the case for some of the speakers there. I'll be doing a live interview with Dr. Matt Normand as well. That'll take place Thursday night. And I'll also be participating in a panel discussion, which should be fun as well. So I hope to see you there in Indianapolis. And speaking of Indianapolis, on November 15th and 16th, Dr. Rick Kubina of Chartlytics will be putting on a 2-day workshop on precision ABA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the show, but that's also in Indianapolis, and again, that's November 15th and 16th. And also, while we're at it, while we're talking about conferences, workshops, etc., the Next Gen Revolution Summit is taking place November 10th and 11th in Las Vegas, and we will talk a little bit more about that in the show as well. That is a conference that you've heard about from previous guest Ryan O'Donnell. This is kind of his brainchild along with his colleagues, so should be a pretty fun event. And that is available both in person and online, and we'll have more details about that later, plus some ways to save if that's something you're interested in checking out. Okay, back to today's show. You know, if you are interested in the history of our field, this is the show for you. Chuck Merbitz has been a behavior analyst for several decades and talks about some really interesting interventions that he was involved with way back when he was in graduate school. Things like helping World War II vets get dates and jobs, but not necessarily in that order. Anyway, it's a really funny conversation, but also very worthwhile in that it's an application of behavior analysis to a kind of a non-ID, non-ASD population. He also tells a story of the development of the ABA program at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, which is wildly successful. He also talks about the benefits of being a humble behavior analyst. He really gets into that towards the end of the show, so you're really going to want to listen to this whole episode all the way through, and certainly hear the recommendations for future practitioners. So, without any further ado, please enjoy this really fun conversation I had with Dr. Chuck Merbitz.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Chuck Merbitz, thank you so much for joining me today on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing?
I am great today.
Again, thanks for joining me. This has been a one of the interviews that has been, asked of me to do, and I'm always happy to take listener recommendations. And as listeners who've been, hanging out for the last dozen or two episodes know that we have been talking about precision teaching on and off. I think starting first with our conversation with Rick Kubina, and we have had other folks come on the show talking about PT, like Kim and Nick Behrens and David Stevens from Chartlytics and more. And so some folks in the PT community reach out to me and say, you got to interview Chuck Merbitz. And I'm like, all right. So here we are, Chuck. Thanks again for coming on the show. So I know you've been in the field for a while, and I always like to get kind of the longer term perspective from those folks who have been at this for, some bit of time here. So my first question is, what was the behavior analysis scene like when you were in college, in grad school? And I guess more to the point, what was your initial exposure to behavior analysis as a student?
Well, I was at the University of Illinois in Chicago in 1967-68, majoring in pinochle and sort of taking courses.
Is that a liberal arts or a science major?
Actually, I think it's a fine arts
I see.
thing. And anyhow, so I was not a very good student, but occasionally I'd take a class that really engaged my interest. And I had a brief but very intense affair with geology, and I'll go into that for just a second because it's about science too. So my professor was named Kelvin Rudolpho. He was from the Philippines. His parents had named him Kelvin after Lord Kelvin because they wanted him to be a scientist. And the guy was a scientist. I mean, he was awesome. Every other professor in geology hated him. They wouldn't invite him to the geology parties. He was like, Rudolph the Red-Nosed. I mean, reason for that was that Dr. Rudolpho, Kelvin, had this bizarre theory, which it was crazy. And so that's why he was ostracized, basically. And it's really funny. And the way his theory went, I mean, it's not like he had sort of invented it, but it's like, oh, this seems, So the way it was is that he thought that the continents were basically floating on magma and were mobile and not fixed. And of course, everybody thought that was just absolutely nutso. And of course, they wouldn't talk to him. Now, you flash forward a few years, and what you have is, of course, the theory of plate tectonics, which is exactly what he was talking about, and exactly what he was trying to communicate, how it explained the Ring of Fire and all this other stuff. But even in a field like geology, you get these things where the theoretical differences are all involved in these personality differences. And people get positions and then they harden, and you have departments fractionating and all kinds of, political stuff. And I learned from that experience that even in a hard science, you get that stuff. And you really shouldn't lock yourself into, I'm not going to listen to those people because, they're idiots. It's not like I have time to hear every nutty theory in psychology, or anybody does. And it's not like I'm not convinced. I mean, I think Skinner's vision is the one that will eventually win, but it will take a long time for a number of reasons, which we can talk about. But still, it's profited me immensely over my career to be able to listen to people who come from other theoretical worlds, even other worlds within psychology, and not just dismiss them out of hand or be mean to them or, do personally nasty things to them, which I can tell you sometimes my colleagues from counseling and other branches of psychology do to behavior analysts, but I've seen behavior analysts do that to them too. So it's not like, not like there's no sins here.
Sure. And I think as Mark Dixon's been on the program a couple of times, and I think one of the more quotable things that he's mentioned is that we don't have the lock on all the smart people as behavior analysts. There's other people in other fields doing good work and have important things to say. I've probably butchered the exact quote, but sounds like he's along the same lines as you are.
And not only that, we don't have the only way to look at humanity or people at this minute in time and act correctly with them. Okay, so here's another brief vignette. in the 80s and 90s, I was in a group called the American Association of Spinal Cord Injury Psychologists and Social Workers. Okay, great. So one thing I found there is that if you want to get something done and you want to hang around with the fun people, go with the social workers and forget about the psychologists, with a few exceptions. So we needed a standards of care document, and I got put on that through some mistaken enthusiasm by my friends in social work. And at one point, I crafted a statement about how to do therapy, which, while it was theoretically awesome, was completely impractical. First, it couldn't be implemented within the association because nobody knew how to do the stuff I was talking about. And secondly, it really ignored some big realities of how to deal with people in crisis and severe trauma. And so I was kind of bummed about that they didn't adopt it and, different things like that. But they were right and I was wrong, because my experience hadn't included enough work with diverse people in really extreme circumstances with horrific histories that would have allowed me to say things or listen to them in ways that would be constructive. Is that making sense?
Yeah. So, one of the buzzwords today in our field, and we've talked about it multiple times here on the show, is, your scope of practice or scope of competence. And it sounds like you kind of ran into some boundaries there, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing about that, though, is that to deal with people who are in severe emotional crisis, you really need some of the techniques from our colleagues in counseling about different, ways to listen to people, ways to approach people, ways to be with people as a human before you start giving them advice about what to count, kind of. And I mean, I had that lesson a number of times over the course of my career. But I think what's really important to communicate here is that you can learn something from everybody. You can learn something from your bitterest enemy, and you can learn something from people who don't share any of your theoretical beliefs. And then the last thing, of course, is that selectionism is actually robust enough to encompass all of this. And so every time I, go off and learn a little bit about, some other way of thinking about things, I try to extract the pragmatic, experiential kinds of things that people, that they say, and then look at that both in the light of whatever theory they're talking about and in the light of selectionism. And gosh, it always turns out that selectionism is brighter. Well, anyhow, so with that aside, I mean, sure. What was the question?
It doesn't matter. That was great. So we were talking about your, I guess, formative experiences in behavior analysis, both as, and I guess more interesting to me, perhaps, is what the behavior analysis scene was like in the late 60s, early 70s, as you kind of transitioned from the University of Chicago to the University of Florida, where I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you went to graduate school. So, yeah, can you talk about what the profession, I guess, more better stated might be?
Well, scene is fine. I was at the University of Illinois at Chicago. If I was at U of Chicago, it would have been very different.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The Gold Diamond and those folks, and that would have been awesome, but it didn't happen. But I can tell you at UIC, there was one behavior analyst, and I was kind of taking psychology courses, and I ran into him, Dave Kuipers, and it's like, oh, this is like what I need to do. That's great. Then I graduated, and I got married, and I got a job, and I was out working in a paint store, actually, and my sister called me up and said, hey, are you tired of working in the paint store yet? Do you want to go to graduate school? And I'm like, yes. So I talked to my wife about it and everything. And my sister and brother-in-law, my brother-in-law was Bruce Masterton, who was a physiological guy at Florida State. But he and my sister were best friends with, that they made friends at Duke with Hank and Sue Pennypacker. And so basically my sister was saying, okay, she said, hey, I've got this friend at the University of Florida, you'd be perfect, just, apply. So there's a very long story connected with that, but the ultimate thing is that I went down and met him, we talked, and it's like, oh, this is cool. And, went to the University of Florida, really it's like an arranged marriage. Sometimes it really works out great. And this time it really worked out great. My sister was right. And she and Hank had talked about, different things. They looked at, my grades, my GREs and stuff like that, and decided, sure, let's try this. And of course, Hank's a real revolutionary himself. I mean, he doesn't necessarily give you the impression of how radical and committed he really is. He's an awesome guy. So anyhow, I go to University of Florida, and the first thing I did was I audited Hank's precision teaching class, Psychology 421, and then it was 621 was the graduate version of that, which involved going to the undergraduate classes and then doing some extra discussion and stuff. I still have the notes from that class because it was the best class I've ever had and one of the best experiences I've ever had in how to not only change behavior, but to know that it's changing in the direction that you planned for it to go, and how to think about it as a scientist. I mean, that class was truly a life-changing experience, which is one of the reasons why, a lot of people have come through UF as undergraduates and then they went other places. Or graduate school. Now, like Maria Ruiz was in my class. Maria was awesome. It's very sad that we lost her. Wayne Fuqua, who's now Western Michigan, was in my class. Just a couple of people. But
was Jim Johnson there, or had he already gone through?
He just left. But Johnson and Pennypacker, the paper in the American Psychologist, had just come out. And so that was a big deal to have a paper like that described something that was happening at UF that was working. So that's basically how I got into it. And it was, more or less, sent there by your family because they were smarter than you, and get yourself into an intellectual environment and a practical environment that was really so awesome.
Are you interested in the intersection of behavior analysis, entrepreneurship, technology, and clinical applications? Then if so, you want to check out the Next Gen Revolution Summit conference. It's happening on November 10th and 11th this year in Las Vegas. And that's at nextgenrevolutionsummit.com for more information. Yes, it will be held in Las Vegas this year, but if you can't make it, they have a live stream option. And this is the third conference they've done in a row, so I think these guys really have the live stream piece nailed. I know sometimes those systems don't work out as great as people intend, but I think they've got the procedure down right now. So this is, again, the brainchild of Ryan O'Donnell and many of his colleagues. So this is a 2-day event that will feature lots of workshops and panel discussions, as well as keynote presentations from the likes of Janet Twyman, Joe Lang, and even podcast guests Sarah Litvak and, of course, Megan Miller. So there's probably so much more about this conference that I'm just barely scratching the surface on. So I'll put some links in today's show notes that can give you more information about that. And if you do decide to attend and you want to save a few bucks in the process, use the offer code MATT, M-A-T-T, at checkout for a 10% discount. So you can go to nextgenrevolutionsummit.com/Matt for more details. So I hope you get a chance to check it out. All right, let's get back to our conversation with Chuck. What sort of activities were you assigned, of course, beyond the precision teaching course? It sounds like, again, and the reason I asked this because it sounded like it's just this, it was this environment where you have all these people who, went on to do great things in the field. So I'm just kind of curious what the environment was like, the things they had you do, and why those experiences, and some, what about that environment created this generation of behavior analysts that went on to do, all these great things?
Well, it was Hank, basically, and he had a friend over in education at Walking. He's also a precision teaching person. It was really Hank and all the things that he was involved with precision teaching of Florida. So there were kind of different sort of islands of activity. Now, one island of activity for me was working in a monkey lab, which I did for like a semester or two, which was great. It was awesome, excellent experience. Then Hank was crafting a joint program with education. And so he basically asked the graduate students, well, okay, you're going to get this behavior analysis thing, but you can have a choice of adding a, clinical competence, clinical licensure to your degree, or you can add school psychology and, go with education. And for a number of reasons, I chose education. Now, having said that, I also spent some time at the VA doing some clinical stuff under Mark King Goldstein. Mark's also a precision teaching guy. You don't hear very much about him because he, God, that guy is so brilliant. Couple of things. So here we had this ward full of alcoholic World War II vets, or post-alcoholic in in the early 70s, in a college town. So this town has something like, 20,000, 28,000 undergraduates who are all basically looking for part-time jobs. And then you got these guys, and then you got the townies. Well, Mark came up with a way of using precision teaching to help these guys get jobs and find romantic liaisons. And I'll take just a minute to describe the system that he used, because it was so brilliant. So, I mean, seriously.
I think the latter part is probably piquing most people's interest right now. So, yeah, go ahead.
It's the same. It's all based on frequency and selectionism and something that we didn't understand at the time, fluency. We didn't know that, but Mark was using it. So let's say that, you want a job and, you're sitting around the ward. Great. So you join Mark's job seeking club. So every Friday you go to the job seeking club data sharing meeting where everybody puts up their chart on an overhead projector and talks about what they did the previous week. And there's a couple of staffers present to make sure that it's all positive and laudatory, and that the more experienced guys can tell the guys who are less experienced in the system, different things. Oh, yeah, when I was at stage 2, here's what I did, stuff. So the steps are something like this. First, you count job thoughts, okay? This is a pretty low barrier, but you want to get up to about 10 job thoughts a day. So you have a chart of your job thoughts, and if a guy comes up and posts a chart and he's stuck at 4 or something like that, that's okay. Because the other guys will talk to him about, well, how do you get more job thoughts and stuff? And the social reinforcement will take over, and it'll accelerate his job thoughts.
And these guys are charting their stuff on the standard acceleration chart?
Oh, yeah, that's very easy. In fact, I can tell you that, Henry used to say that the difficulty of teaching people to chart is directly related to the number of years of formal education. And it goes to an asymptote with PhD. It's kind of a joke. But if you really want to see how easy it is to do, the best group of people to teach to chart is like 4th graders. You can teach them to chart perfectly, 20 minutes a day, 1 week, no problem. they'll do it. And then in another couple of weeks, you can have them doing experimental analysis. But so here we are, we're counting job thoughts. We're up to 10 a day. That's great. Now we start doing job conversations. And then we start doing job conversations with different people. Okay. And then as this thing goes along, you get to looking for job information, which, is obviously at that point, newspaper ads and stuff, because we didn't have the internet. It hadn't been invented. And, going around town and looking for, job postings. Then Mark knew that there's a couple of interesting facts there is that number one, you're much more likely to get a job from a person if you've got a personal recommendation from someone else that person knows. Okay? It's very similar to sort of dating, which is like if your girlfriend introduces you to some guy, I mean, she might have met him 3 minutes earlier in the bar, but you're much more likely to say, oh, he's not an axe murderer, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the other thing is that your conversation with those people is almost always first time on the phone. And when you're up to that point in the scale, you're doing 10 job phone calls a day, which is a lot, right? And here's your problem, though. You leave a message, and then your phone rings, and this guy says, I'm blah, 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 blah from Gurkha Industries, and you left a message for me. Now, you have to know the guy's real name, his phone number, and of course, this is a day we didn't have cell phones, you didn't have, caller ID, anything like that, and you had to know his name of his company and basically what they did. So Goldstein said, what you do is before you call anybody, you get a 3x5 card, you write his name and stuff like that on it, so that when he calls you back, you can shuffle through the cards in your pocket and pick out the one that sounds closest to this person on the phone, then you can talk to him. So you call the guy and you say, I'm really interested in fertilizer or paint or hardware or, animal feed, whatever it is. And I'm wondering if you have a job for a person with my skills. I'm a little older, I'm a little more mature, I can do these things. Guy says no. Then you say, well, do you know anybody in town who might be able to use somebody with talents like mine? Now, it doesn't matter if the guy thinks like, well, you're a real turkey, and I'm going to send you to my biggest competitor so that you'll be a drag on him. Or he thinks, you might work out good for my brother-in-law or something like that. If he says, well, why don't you call, Joe Lampshade, over at, Fanbelt Industries, and he might have something. So great. So now you start a 3x5 card, you call Joe Lampshade, and when you talk to Joe, you say, oh, Matt over in behavior analysis said that he thought I'd be a good fit for your company. And can I come in for an interview? So what you get there is not only the high frequency, 10 job calls a day, a system for fielding those calls that allows you to deal with the person on the other end of the line as if he is the only other human in the world, which is what you want, and a personal referral from somebody that this guy's heard of. So it was awesome.
So when you call that other person, you could say, hey, Joe Smith from, Ace Hardware told me to call you, blah, 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 blah. And then you're
right, perhaps
one step up the rung of that ladder of employment.
You've got a town full of bright, young, awesome people who are all looking for these same jobs. And yet the old alcoholic, broken down veterans get hired. Well, because Goldstein's system, if you just pursue it, 10 calls a day is a heck of a lot, but you'll get there. And you want to do like 2 interviews a day because you don't want to burn out. But the other side is that while you're in this process, not only are the guys who are a little more advanced on the scale helping you, they might suggest, well, you could try calling this guy. I talked to him and stuff. Or, and my mother-in-law says that the exterminators are looking for people or whatever. But also, in a couple, 3 weeks, another guy comes into the thing who's, trying to do job thoughts, and you get to help him. And so it's a very, very powerful system for, building behavior in this community that's directed toward pro-social ends, and it's all structured with, positive social things. It was an awesome system. Gold job seeking scale.
All right, so we got the job search down. What I'm really interested is in the system for dating. So let's get into that, because I know listeners are probably like saying, okay, yeah, let's move on, because this is actually, not that the other one was uninteresting, but this is actually a very unusual application of behavioral principles.
Well, okay, so again, your guys are socially isolated. They've been alcoholics, so a lot of times their families have rejected them. They kind of shuffle along with their heads down. They don't make eye contact. And in many ways, they've been beaten by the world. Not quite as bad as like a second grader, but still. So the social contact scale works exactly the same way. So the first thing is you want to get your 10 thoughts a day about meeting other people. Now, that's pretty low bar, right? And then what you want to do is you want to do 10 eye contacts a day with people, any people of the same persuasion, people you see in the ward every day, doesn't matter. Just get 10 a day. You get 10 eye contacts a day, then you can go to 10 eye contacts a day with different people. Now, depending on how fast you can be moved on the scale, then you go to 10 eye contacts a day of people of the persuasion that you'd like to start dating. Then you go to 10 eye contacts a day of different people of the persuasion that you'd like to start dating. So all of a sudden, these guys are like making eye contact with women. Then a really key step, you start counting smiles returned. Now, smiles returned is an awesome thing to count, because what it'll do is it'll shape you out of the alcoholic leer into something that other people will relate to. And again, you're the guys a little bit longer, who've been in the system a little bit longer, can talk to you about that. Well, when you look at a woman like that, she thinks you're a murderer. So this isn't going to fly. If you really want to talk to her, you got to change. And so the environment shapes up an appropriate, friendly smile, because you're counting smiles returned from people of the persuasion that you want to meet, which in those days was almost exclusively women. I think, in fact, it was, but whatever. The thing is that it's such a brilliant strategy, because it uses the environmental selection to get you to the behavior you want. So then you do smiles returned, then you start doing, hi, how are you? Exchange of personal information, et cetera, et cetera. And they used to joke about the 13th step on the social contact scale, which I don't want to necessarily get into. But the hardest parts are those early steps. And the really key things are high-frequency behavior that is deliberately shaped by the environment to be appropriate for social contact. And it worked great. And again, Gainesville is full of college students who are like, healthy and pretty and, awesome and smart and da-da-da-da. Well, that's fine, but these guys, that's not the market that these guys were in, because they're in their 50s and 60s, and yet they're lonely too. And with this system, you can go out and meet other people who will be friendly with you, who will meet you later on for coffee, and start stepping into like, well, is this really a date, and stuff like that.
So were there excuse me, were there any long-term relationships or even marriages and so forth that came out of this? This just fascinates me.
I can cite a few long-term relationships because I was only on that unit for, I think, 6 months. I mean, Goldstein's obviously a brilliant behavior analyst, just incredibly brilliant. And you've never heard of him because what he did from going as a psychologist at the VA was he shifted over and became mayor of Gainesville.
Really?
Yeah, really. And he worked with Hank on the whole Mamacare, Mamatech thing, and he's still working with Hank on that. So he was a really key part of the behavior analysis scene that doesn't, basically get any press in our press. And not only that, the social context scale, the job seeking scale, to my knowledge, have never been published. And I've still occasionally, last time I saw Mark a couple of years ago, I was like, Mark, you got to publish these. And he's like, okay.
All right. Well, that's a story I definitely want to follow up on. So I will, I'll try to see.
Behavior. You set the environment to shape that behavior, and you set up a social structure that will maintain the high frequencies until the environmental shaping can take over. So that's why you have that meeting every week, and you have the guys present their own charts. They own the data. This is their life, and the other guys can help them do it. It's staggeringly brilliant. Very,
very cool. Thanks for providing those two really neat examples of how one can use precision teaching in that way. And like I said, I'll definitely try to track down Dr. Goldstein.
Yes, Hank will give you his phone number.
All right, everyone, you already know ABA. Now gain confidence in your interventions and clinical decisions. Discover techniques that help you clearly target, analyze, and change behavior with an engaging workshop on implementing precision teaching from expert Dr. Rick Kubina. Yes, this is a 2-day workshop on November 15th and 16th in the great city of Indianapolis. It'll be, again, led by Dr. Rick Kubina of Chartlytics and Central Reach, as well as Penn State University. Boy, this guy has lots of jobs. Anyway, this workshop will guide you through the steps of precision measurement and help you obtain superior ABA outcomes. You will learn evidence-based science and practical techniques that you can implement in your own ABA service delivery. And at this event, 12 Type 2 continuing education units will be available. So to go check it out, go to chartlytics.com/workshops. You can sign up there. And if you want to save 10% on checkout, use the offer code MATT. Again, that's chartlytics.com/workshops, offer code MATT. So I don't want to skip all over the place, but I do want to talk about your long career at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And again, I hope I'm not mixing up my Chicago area university settings, but anyway, I'm going to quote from your Vita. The ABA program at Chicago went from an initial group of 22 new master's students and 1 full-time faculty in 2004 to 90-plus students and 25-plus PhD students in 2011, with 6 full-time faculty members and 2.5 staff. The budget approximated $3.2 million in revenue and $1.02 million in expenses. As of 2011, the department was one of the 5 largest ABA departments in the world. So my question related to, at the most basic sense, what made the Chicago School so successful? I mean, because that sounds like, the definition of success there, right? Very rapid growth, and so on. So can you comment on that? And I'm also interested in your comments on the field of graduate education and applied behavior analysis more generally, but we can get into that in a little bit.
So here's how I got to the Chicago School. I was a tenured associate professor at the Illinois Institute of Technology. I had grants. I had more computers, than I could throw in every direction. I can travel to conferences. I had recently traveled to Hawaii, for example, to do presentations. And I, as a tenured person, I was basically secure at IIT. Now, I was in the counseling program there. They didn't have an ABA program. They had counseling, IO, and clinical. And it was like 98% graduate work. All the undergraduates were engineering types and architects and stuff like that. I personally came into that with assistive technology, which relates back to a whole nother arena. But anyhow, so here I am. I'm, chugging along, pretty happy. And this BCBA thing comes up. Now, I had done, back when the BCBA started, I remember some advice from Ogden Lindsley, who said, get every certification you can, even if it's like plumbing. And I'm like, okay. So I went and got the BCBA certification, thinking that it was, likely to be useful. And then I could see the BCBA thing expanding. And then I went and did a presentation to the psychology department at IIT saying, look, I could bring in another dozen graduate students every year with this BCBA thing. And all we have to do is start a track in it, and we can use some of the classes that we already have, and we need some additional ones and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. And let's take a coffee break.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And you'll be fine, Chuck. And, oh, by the way, you're teaching one of your favorite classes like every other year because that's, the only time they could offer an elective in the system. But the guy who was teaching the learning classes for clinical psych was retiring, and I'm slotted to take his place. So here's a bit of a fantasy. If that had actually happened, it would have been an incredible explosion, because what would happen is that the 12 clinical doc students would have taken my class as part of their first semester, and I would completely ruin them for the rest of the faculty. It would have been awesome. So I went to a meeting at the Chicago school with one of the clinical faculty who said, I just got permission to start this ABA program. Are you interested in applying for that job? And I'm like, no way in hell. I've got tenure, I can sit and retire here, and as long as I don't murder anybody, I have a pretty secure job. Not a lot of heavy lifting. And you want me to come to a school that's 4 years out of bankruptcy, it's a private nonprofit, but it's really struggling. It's not really eclectic. It's mostly Freudian, and one of the only bastions of Freudianism left in the whole Midwest, I think. And it has has a counseling program that needs a head. It wants to start a school psych program. It wants to start this ABA program, and it doesn't have permission to do any of that. So what it's doing is it's taking these things and making them, quote, master's tracks within clinical psychology, and then not having any of the clinical doc students take them. So it's got all these bad markers. You could go there and get a job, and then the school could collapse in 2 years. And where would you be? Right? You left a tenured position. That's just crazy. Okay. So I told him no. So then in January, February, my wife and I, were at a conference, the Illinois Association for Behavior Analysis, or at that time, Behavior Analysis Society of Illinois, Basel. And my wife overhears this guy talking to somebody else about, this wonderful opportunity. And so she goes over to Chris and says, hey, wait till I tell Chuck about this. He would this would be perfect for him, And Chris says, oh, never mind. I already talked to him. He said he's not interested. And she said, I'll talk to him.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, right. So she came back to me and she said, look, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. Yes, I know the school is flaky. Yes, I know their finances are shaky, but you get to define the curriculum. You get to hire the faculty. If you can do this, this will be your dream come true. And I've got a job. And so when it crashes and burns, or if it crashes and burns, I'll, support us until we, get something else going for you. And I'm like, okay, wise. So I applied, and they said, all right, you're going to come in and, do a presentation of the faculty. And then, if that goes well, we'll do more interviews and stuff like that. So I cranked up this presentation, and Nancy looked at it and said, no, this will not do. Okay, first, it's like all this research behavior analysis stuff. Second, it doesn't really display the range of what you can bring to this thing. Let's do another one. So she, very instrumental in crafting a presentation that showed that, yeah, I had publications that talked about statistics, even though everything I was doing was a single subject. And so, she kind of popped that one in there to say, oh, yes, we've got this skill, but it's really about working with the individual. And she made me look, well, she actually revealed, or anyhow, however it went, it's like, well, it's not like this guy takes his theory and rams it into every situation. It's more like this guy listens to the people who come to him with these different kinds of problems and issues and disabilities and all kinds of stuff, and then crafts a solution based on the stuff that he knows will work, which is very different. And not only that, but he'll listen to you, because I had friends in counseling and other arenas like that where we'd have nice conversations about their clients and what they're doing and how to think about it, stuff like that. So I give this presentation. All right. They invite me back for an interview. Now, the thing is that they were actually looking for one person to run the Masters in Counseling, which at that point was huge, run this new ABA program. So here we are, it's about June or so, April, May, June, and this thing is starting in late August. And, oh, by the way, write and propose and get accepted a school psych program all at the same time. Well, this is crazy. Now, my competition was this lady. She's really Texan, although, very strong Mexican heritage. And, she's very smart, and she's really, really good in the counseling stuff, but she doesn't have any of the other stuff. Now, I, of course, was certified as a school psychologist, and I had the ABA stuff. So the school, looking for one person to fill all three of those jobs, and being in the nutty place that it was, said, well, look, we'll just hire both of them. We'll give this guy these two, and we'll give her the counseling thing, and let's see what happens. And, of course, they were getting ready to move, so Virginia and I were in the same office. We shared a printer. It was a lot of fun. She's one of my best friends. So my job then was to try to hire Bcba faculty, of whom there were, I think, 8 or something like that, or 13 in the whole state of Illinois, most of whom were concentrated at SIU, 300 miles away and completely unavailable. But I did manage to get Dave Piles on board as a half-time person. And then I filled out, the rest with people who could teach one class or two classes as adjuncts. Because the financial model for this school is that you have a few full-time faculty, and then the people who are practicing clinicians come in and teach one class in their area of expertise. So you have actually a very large faculty, quote unquote, most of whom are adjuncts who are full-time doing other things. That's the school's model, and it's still the model today. But it didn't really work that well in behavior analysis at that time, because there was like no people in behavior analysis who were practicing up in Chicago that would, take time to teach a class, aside from the few people that I managed to find. So Doreen Vietes, like I said, Dave Piles. I managed to find a few people who would come in and teach a class. I took the curriculum that Chris Leonhard and Clinical had designed and gotten approved, and made it into something that would actually kind of work. And then these students showed up, and we were off to the races. I found some field placements for them. That was a huge problem. Quality of field placements. So what are the keys to success there? Well, one of my keys to success was that the way that school was structured, they had some people who would field phone calls from prospective students and talk to them about, the different departments. And little unbeknownst to me, we totally lucked out because one of those people was a guy from Western Michigan who, had gotten a degree in Western Michigan, not a PhD, but gotten a bachelor's degree from Western and understood behavior analysis, and then, got this job. And so he's working, talking to prospective students and answering the phone calls and stuff. And like, okay, well, look, here's the, and, we talked to him. And he'd basically take the students who called and sort of sort them and send us some good ones. So we ended up getting far better students than that school deserved. And with the better students than the school deserved, we also got better faculty than the school deserved. Now, I have to say that was uniformly true in the other departments as well. As I got to know the faculty and the students in clinical and counseling and school and IO, I really think that the school did a superior job of marketing, and the faculty, really essentially, rose to the occasion. And most of my energy as a department chair was basically spent fighting the administration to either keep things working that were working or to stop things from happening that would be destructive.
I see. So what I'm assuming in your classroom instruction, you were infusing precision teaching, or at least the use of the standard acceleration chart in your coursework, right?
We had a class called Observation and Measurement, and a piece of observation and measurement basically went from cumulative record to the standard acceleration chart and the linkage and implications of that. And in order to do that, we also made people do a bunch of projects using charts. Now, you can, a student can do a dozen projects in one semester using the chart in PT very, very easily. Because we taught the basic vocabulary using SAFMEDs. Right there's a project right there, my SAFMEDs, okay? And so that class basically started them out. And then I was able to hire John Eshelman eventually, and that really helped a lot because Eshelman's, of course, a really good precision teacher. And having multiple faculty, Eshelman, Doreen, me, who understood precision teaching and wanted to push it, made a huge difference. Because if a student can bump into these things in 3 or 4 different classes, then that's what you basically need. The other thing is that we also had to use the same techniques to make the students competent in other things. They had to know how to do momentary time sampling, and they had to know how to do partial interval and whole interval, and they had to be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of each of these systems of measurement, and talk about when you might have to deploy one or the other of them. And so, yes, PT was in the curriculum in several places. There was really only, I think, one course ever in precision teaching, qua precision teaching, where we really went into things like component-composite relations and structure of behavior, the prediction of behavior, acceleration, implications of accelerations. In observation and measurements, we did cover jumps and turns and stuff like that, because once you're working with frequency, there's only a few things that your data can do that indicate what's happening with the people. I mean, because, let me rephrase that. There's relatively few patterns of change that are show up very consistently across all human behavior change efforts because of the nature of frequency. And so, we had the students, able to do that, identify accelerations at a glance and stuff like that, which is very key tool skills for somebody who wants to do precision teaching. Because if you don't understand the tool skills, it becomes a gut-wrenching nightmare And if you have the tool skills at fluency, then it's like, oh, it's easier to do this than anything else, which incidentally is the same thing for third grade math, reading, geography, anything. We also had, like Dave Piles was not a precision teacher and never was, never will be. It's okay. It's good. We need a variety of perspectives. PT does not have a lock on the ways to think about humanity or all situations. And it just gives you a very strong, basis. So let's see, what else? Oh, so here's another key to success. In your first semester, you do observation and measurement, which is really a capsule course in radical behaviorism and the implications, the measurement implications of radical behaviorism and how to make that work on the ground. And we also sent everybody over to the counseling department to take the basic clinical skills classes from the counseling professors, how to listen, that kind of stuff. Now, some of my colleagues that I've talked to seem very afraid to do something like that. Like if we take our students and send them over to them, our students will somehow get corrupted and not be good behavior analysts. I says, well, first, and I think that's wrong. First, if you really have a superior system and a superior theory, and you've laid it out to the students very well, and they understand and appreciate it, they will be able to go off and listen to anybody else and not have a problem. And it's not like the students will follow the theory du jour of whatever classes they're in, and they take a class from Freudian, they become Freudians. That's not the way it is. These are smart people, and if you give them the right tools, they'll be able to listen to the Freudian and talk about it and say, well, okay, now clinically, what happens? How do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? And they're not going to insult the person by necessarily saying, okay, I explain this way, but they have that explanation available if the professor wants it. And, most of those folks are open-minded enough to, be able to deal with that. It's absolutely true that out of the, a couple hundred students that were there during my tenure, we lost, I think, 2. Who's like, oh my God, I really have to live in this system. I can't really live in behavior analysis. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter. I would much rather have them go and be an enthusiastic counselor person than an unhappy and badly performing behavior analysis person.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I just had too is that the willingness to send people to other, to listen to other points of view on behavior, I think is helpful too, in that it helps people kind of translate what's going. Okay, he's talking about this from perhaps a psychodynamic point of view or some other point of view. Excuse me. But it's fun to listen to that stuff. At least I find it fun to listen to that stuff. And as someone's explaining something, translate that into the basic behavioral processes that I suspect are what's going on. And so I think it's probably a fun conceptual exercise for the students as well to kind of listen to what's going on and basically translate, okay, well, they're talking about, unconditional positive regard, and I'm thinking of that as, some sort of non-contingent reinforcement process,
Right. You're absolutely right. But there's even more to it than that. One thing that I find very distressing is an arrogant behavior analyst. And you send them to a good, experienced counseling person, and they'll start telling you stories about the middle-aged women in their practice who were systematically raped as children for years and decades. And their families basically told them to, shut up and take it. And they lead terribly destructive, self-destructive, painful, awful lives as the result of this. Now, it's not that the behavior analytic tools to talk about behavior change aren't useful. it's that the incredible human pain that people bring to the situations are often lost on students who aren't exposed even to stories about things like that. And it doesn't prepare them to approach every client with some humility, because you don't know their backstory. If you're lucky, they'll tell you their backstory, and it'll help you to work more effectively with them. But there's a lot of wonderful people in this world, and there's a lot of people who have been treated really, really badly, and whose lives have been shattered. And you can see them going out and doing self-destructive things with the drugs. You can see them, letting guys live in their trailer who are off stealing hubcaps and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, why don't you just kick them out? Because, well, it's a whole universe that we have to grapple with. And it's a much more of a pragmatic and human relationship grappling than it is a kind of cut and dried count this kind of grappling. By the time you get a client to the place where you can have them count things, 90% of the work is done. And we usually don't think about that in behavior analysis because we focus on the stuff that we can measure, but there's a whole hell of a universe out there that we don't have really good measurement tools for. I'm not saying that they do. I don't think they do either, but that's another story. But those things happen to people. Those are valid experiences. Those are things that shape the way people live and hurt and talk and experience. And we, as behavior analysts, have to be able to grapple with that. Now, I don't really do that. I mean, I know a little bit about FAP and ACT and relational frame theory and stuff like that, and I think that's awesome. I mean, you go for it, guys. Especially you can read like the FAP books, and it's very clear that they're onto something. But we're a very young science, and we have got so much to learn, and there's only so many minutes in your lifetime, and you got to pick what you're going to learn. But you still shouldn't restrict your thoughts and energies to the stuff that's easy to measure, and especially because you're afraid of the stuff that's not.
That's a fantastic point.
There's so many stories out, even as a behavior analyst. Okay, wait. Let's do this. Give me like a 2-minute break,
sure,
and I'll be right back. So here's the situation. I'm teaching rehabilitation counseling students at IIT, master students, who are going to work with people with disability. Every other year, I get to teach an elective precision teaching class. And this one year, I had a bunch of students who were working full-time in the field and getting their master's degree part-time. But, they come into class Thursday night. This is nights and weekend students. And I tell them that you're going to do 12 projects, this semester, and they almost all bolt for the door, but it's pretty too late for that. And then I say, but this is really easy because these projects can be they're short, and at least 2 of the projects are going to be stuff that I'm having you do, so that knocks 2 of them out right away, etc. So after class, a student comes up to me and says, well, I was just promoted to be the behavior manager for the day program where I work with adults with developmental disabilities. And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, of course, you've never had a course in behavior analysis, or behavior management or anything even remotely related, but okay. And he says, I've got this problem. We've got this woman who is always tantruming. She's early 40s. She lives in a group home. She comes to us, and we can't figure out why she keeps throwing these tantrums. We've sent her to a psychiatrist. They've upped her medications. She's just always tantruming. And so the first question I'm asked is like, well, do you control her diet? Thinking that, every day when you give them the hot dogs with the additives in it, it's, sparking some kind of physiologic. And it's like, no. Every day she eats the same thing. She selects what she wants. She gets hamburger, French fries. And I know that because I've been eating lunch with her. And that goes very well. Okay. So I said, all right. So your first thing is you have to go and do a chart of the tantrums. So go back, and these are all documented. So go back and pull her record and count the number of tantrums per day and put them on a chart and then bring that to class next week. So he did. And he brings me the damnedest looking chart I ever saw because it looked like a saw. There'd be flat spots and then tantrum spikes, and then it would come down, and then there'd be flat, then spikes, and then come down. So the first thing is when you see this, you know that there's no physiological driver. There can't be, because the flat spots. The second thing is like, okay, well, something in the environment is driving these tantrums. You have to find out what it is. So you have to look exactly when they occur, what happens before, what happens afterward. So he comes back next week and he says, well, the tantrums were all occurring when we tried to load her on the bus, but only on certain days. And the reason for the tantrums was that when she got off the bus at the group home, there was one staffer on duty who was raping her every week.
What?
And of course, the institutional response had been to up her medications to make her more compliant. Let's not even go there. He says, but, I reported this and, we've taken care of it. He's no longer, blah, blah, blah. But that thing always stuck with me. Because what it tells you is that if your chart is an honest record of life, then it will teach you something about life, even if it's something you don't want to hear and is unexpected. And just as an aside, the population group at the highest rate of sexual abuse is, of course, people with disabilities, range upwards of 70% until you get to the psychiatric disabilities, and then it's like 90s and higher. But the thing here is that a chart is a picture of life changing over time. It's a picture of selectionism in action. One of the things we didn't get to talk about is the 24/7 data records that I created of people with spinal cord injury in wheelchairs. And those things show you very clearly the relationship between every single behavior and what the chart looks like. Because I published that. It's a 24/7 record of each individual behavior and then the chart of the same thing. And it's really interesting because you can tell way more from the chart clinically than you can from those individual records. Okay. So I know we're just about out of time.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought on this, because this is obviously a very, very deep and very important topic here. So don't.
Environment's always selecting behavior. We're always being conditioned. We're always emitting frequency of behavior. You can't get away from time. And if you stand back and look at it, the two very most fundamental categories that we can apply here are what the hell happened, the identity of the behavior, and when it occurred. And I say when in the Unix sense, in the sense of like what absolute time and date did this thing occur? 10 o'clock on Friday morning or 11:46 or whatever. And because that very fundamental record is Skinner's cumulative record. It's time and a step up for each event. And it's based on those two things. Frequency is the slope of the cumulative record, right? So that's easy. So what you're doing is you're taking each of Skinner's cumulative records and making that into a single dot, and then you line the dots up according to the date that they occurred, and then all of a sudden, voila, you have acceleration, count per time, which is exactly like physical acceleration, acceleration, deceleration, and it allows you to predict in real time what the heck is going to happen to the person that's in your care, what they're going to do, And sometimes you look at it and you say, oh my God, there's so much variability, I can't predict. And then you can work on reducing the variability. Or sometimes you say, oh my God, what's driving the variability? Another real quick story here about what's driving the variability is I was working with a speech-language pathologist who was doing logical problem solving with a guy with brain injury, and we were counting problems, correct inferences in this little problem set and cues that she gave because she was very experienced, but she's still interested in that. And we couldn't get a handle on the guy's frequency of problem solving because it would be like a sawtooth. They would go up for like a week and a half, then it would go down for a week, then it would go up for a week, then it would go down for a week. And it wasn't until we plotted those accelerations and then I plotted her Q accelerations. I mean, we've been doing this every week, but it wasn't until I overlaid those two plots that we could see that the acceleration of Qs is inversely related to the acceleration of corrects, which basically means that queuing drives out the correct answers. It also means that these two people, one of them with a severe brain injury and one of them a very smart lady with a master's degree and a lot of clinical experience, were dancing through time in this thing, and the guy was leading more than she was. But it works the same way in a classroom. What happens if the students just, you ask a student a question and they just sit there quietly and don't answer? Eventually, you give them a cue, right? And then they say something and that reinforces your cue giving. And so you cue them, next time a little bit more quickly and the next time a little more quickly. And pretty soon you're doing all the talking and the students are not talking at all. That's no good. So what you get there is the reciprocal social dance that is revealed by the acceleration of the frequencies of each actor's little actions. And we had you really have the same thing with the lady who was being raped. And you really have the same thing with the social contact scale, where the accelerations of what people were doing were driven by their consequences in their environment. So, okay. We can go on like this for hours. We can talk about how this is selectionism. We can talk about how the model for selectionism is basically count over time, which of course is frequency, and that the thing you want to do is to plot your data in ways that respect the way those data grow and change, in the abstract, without any preconceptions. And with natural, population frequencies, it's all semi-log. So that's how the chart works. Anyhow, one of the reasons.
Awesome. No, we're good. We're good. So I got just a couple quick questions or quick actual questions. The answers can be what they'll be, of course. But before we head out here, so Chuck, given your, I guess, long-term perspective on the field, and it's particularly with your experience as someone training new BCBAs, what sorts of things in the field are you excited about? And conversely, what sort of things, to the extent to which they do worry you or keep you up at night about the growth or the development of the profession of behavior analysis?
One of the things that I'm most excited about is the explosion in the use of frequency measures and acceleration in not only work with autism and people with severe disabilities, but also in regular schools with, regular kids. And stuff like fit learning. Very quickly, the advantage of using frequencies and acceleration is not only that you get the kid from point A to point B faster, but you also are on a curriculum ladder, and you get to the end of the ladder way the hell more quickly if you have a solid foundation on the lower level steps. And the basic theory of precision teaching and component composite analysis tells you that the components of behavior are going to be the limiting factor on the frequency of the composite, which basically means that if you are really slow at writing your digits, math is going to be a terrible pain, okay? Or if you're very slow at plotting data, then data analysis is going to be a terrible pain. And because all life occurs in time, data collection and analysis has to be really fast, because otherwise the person has moved on, before you got your data plotted and before you make your decisions. So I'm very heartened by, for example, Cabina's Chartlytics thing, because it reduces the workload of the data plotting and sets up the possibility for lots more analyses than we can do just on individuals. So those things are really heartening. And if you look at the innovations engendered by precision teaching over the last 20 years, that's really heartening too. And I can't wait to see where that goes. I worry a little bit about the field because of the explosive growth of the field. Most of the people out there are very inexperienced, and just of necessity. I mean, you get your Bcba and you work for 2 years and you're still inexperienced. And in my view, it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean I wouldn't hire you or anything like that. But a problem with the way the Bcba is dealing with the knowledge base that you have to have is that it's following the guidelines of polling everybody to figure out what they think and then following that pretty closely. And the problem there is that in 2 or 3 or 4 years, you don't have the experience in order to be able to make that judgment, in my view. And so it's not like those opinions are not important. They are terribly important, but they need to be balanced against the opinions of people who've been out there for 10 years or 20 years. And that's a very different thing. And it gives you a different perspective on the skill sets and the analysis sets that you ought to have as a Bcba. So, the tiny example for that is that the Bcba a couple of years ago decided that they were going to follow statistics and make frequency equal to count, which of course is what Don Baer always said, even in the 60s and 70s, and not frequency equals rate, which is what, of course, Lindsley had said. Well, I think that's wrong because it moves us away from the natural sciences, and count is an incredible key thing, but count in the absence of time is almost completely useless. John choked 6 times over his lifetime, in the last day, in the last year. I mean, you need the time base there. So the thing that worries me is that move toward the sort of lowest common denominator in the field as opposed to pushing beyond. Now, I think it's very heartening that there's an economic slot for behavior analysts. I think that the field of behavior change and the scope for behavioral theory is way broader than behavior analysis, and it encompasses lots of school things and family interactions and social things and all kinds of stuff that we are not there yet. And I see that happening, slowly, but, that's okay. I mean, you got to compare us to other sciences. Remember the greatest chemist in the history of the English language, J.B. Priestley. And Priestley, on his deathbed, said, Lavoisier was wrong. Phlogiston is it. You probably never heard of phlogiston, but in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, phlogiston was the operating theory of combustion and the most important thing in chemistry. And then this guy, Lavoisier, who was executed in 1797, had taken the discovery of oxygen and constructed the oxygen theory, which says there is no phlogiston. It's really oxygen combining in and out of the atmosphere. And nowadays, nobody's ever heard of phlogiston, and it's all oxygen. Well, most of psychology is kind of a phlogiston theory. And we don't have time to go into, sort of what that means. But behavior analysis is different. Behavior analysis is based on measurement. In this example, this chemistry example, the way that you measure something is by weighing it. And if you think about the transition between taking the essential properties of something, its yellowness, if it's sulfur, its granularity and stuff like that, and throwing all that away and having to buy a really expensive instrument to weigh this stuff instead, it's a huge transition and a big investment. We're in that same situation because right now we're asking people to make a huge investment in learning how to think about frequencies, how to do the chart, how to buy a computer so that you can do cumulative records, get into the Chartlytics program, stuff like that, rather than just sitting there and looking at the kids and doing plus and minus on their corrects and incorrects. And plus and minus on their corrects and incorrects is a heck of a lot easier, but also a hell of a lot less precise, and it doesn't reveal certain things. Like you can't tell if the person is in a reinforcement situation or not. Obviously when you're getting maladaptive behavior, if you believe in reinforcement, that means you're not reinforcing the good stuff enough to drive out the maladaptive stuff. Anyhow, let me switch over to your last question.
Right. So what advice would you give for a newly minted Bcba?
Well, the single best educational experience that I think you can get as a working professional is to go to the Summer Institute at Morningside, which is like 6 weeks long. And you get lectures during the morning by people like Joe Lang and Kent Johnson and Libby Street. And then in the afternoon, you go teach kids and put this stuff to direct work. So that what they say is, visible and real, to you in the classroom. There are people in a lot of different places who are teaching important things. Pat McGreevy in Florida. Oh my God. Eshelman, Carrie, especially, Kim. If you look for somebody, Elizabeth Houghton, if you look for somebody who understands the chart, you will find somebody who will take you on and mentor you if you're willing to learn it. Which again is a pretty hilarious thing, because you could go up to Ogden Lindsley as a high school student and show him your grubby little chart, or even as an elementary school student, with the corner bitten off, and he will look at it and give you his full attention on what this chart means. That's because the chart is a communication system that transcends our social structures and our academic degrees and stuff like that. It's a picture of the reality of a single human life for one or two behaviors and how that life is going, whether it's math or tantrums or job thoughts. It's a picture of your life over time. The people who know how to do that are willing to share it with you. So you basically scratch around in your environment to find somebody who will teach you how to chart and work with you. You can do the Chartlytics webinars. You can go to Standard Acceleration Society and say, hey, what do you guys got in your resource bank? The Precision Teaching Conference in November is like one of the great, basically bargains of the century, because it's so cheap to go to. But you get to look at the work that these people have done. And because the chart is also a communication system, once you learn how to read it, and anybody there will take a minute to show you how to do that, which is not really very hard if you can get the emotional courage up to do it. And you will learn from it, and it will teach you how to make your students teach you what you need to know. Because the chart is really a device, as Lindsley said, for self-knowledge. It's really a device to teach you what your effect on other people is. Because you do stuff and their data go up and down, and then you're like, oh my God, why did I do that? Now, if you're going to use the chart, I have to warn you that because it shows the brutal reality of what you're doing, there will be times when you look at somebody's data, someone for whom you're responsible, and you say, oh my God, what am I going to tell this person tomorrow? What am I going to have them do? I don't understand this. Because while we talk mostly about the wonderful achievements that you can get out of your students as they accelerate, but there's also the fact that there are many things going on in somebody's life, and you don't always have the power to make something good happen. And if something good is not happening, the chart will tell you that. And it is then your responsibility, your curse, your job, your obsession to figure out what you can do about this person's life so that their chart will go up. You either have to isolate, the stimulus conditions. You have to go back and find out what's wrong medically with them. You have to figure out what the hell is happening at home. I mean, it is a tremendous responsibility, and that goes with its tremendous power.
I've never heard it described that way, but after hearing what you said, that makes all the sense in the world.
I mean, it's just a picture of what this life is doing. And so, my influence on somebody who sits in front of me and wants to learn math or behavior analysis or whatever is very limited, really, when you think about it. I have to set up the environment to accelerate certain pieces of their behavior and decelerate others. But they got other stuff going on. They just broke up with their significant other. Their dog just died. Their parents are sick. I mean, God knows. And I need to approach that with the humility of not making assumptions about them that are destructive and that lead me to do stuff to them that is not humane. And so obviously, the first thing to do if they're verbal is ask them, what the heck is going on with your life? And gosh, we're not making progress here. This is not working for you. What should we do? And by the way, having learned that lesson, I can tell you that I've had a few students who struggled so badly as behavior analysis students. They were just like, and I would talk to them. I'd say, listen, this isn't working for you. You're not getting good grades. All this stuff is happening. What do you want to do about it? I want to see you be successful. And honestly, I'd rather see you be a successful artist or sculptor than an unhappy, unsuccessful behavior analyst. I want you to thrive as a human being, not necessarily be another behavior analyst. Is this really the right thing for you? Which is kind of funny because the IO literature says that interests are a better predictor of job success than aptitudes, which is basically their way of saying, well, they need to follow the reinforcers, So I don't know. I can totally keep talking for another 2 hours, but maybe that's not so productive. I don't know, whatever.
Well, I think the conversation we've had already has been a ton of fun for me, and I am willing to bet it's going to be the same, and not only that, but also super informative for our listeners. So perhaps we can do another round at a different point in time, but I think this is, again, it's been a wide-ranging and fun conversation that went a lot of unexpected directions, and Chuck, I really, really thank you for your time this morning. This has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Been my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.